Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Offside Chat podcast. Joining me as always is Robbie. I'm delighted to welcome Alo back as well to the podcast for this one. We had to kick Marcus out of this episode because this was Jack Charlton and he's an honorary Irishman, so we couldn't have an Englishman on for this episode, lads. But look, this show is obviously dedicated to someone that's a footballing icon, someone whose passion and humour and determination really touched the hearts of millions of people in England and in Ireland. But he is a legend in this country, without a doubt, the greatest manager we've ever had. And obviously, as I said, it's the one and only Jack Charlton. Um, Before we get into it, lads, a quick kind of synopsis, as I suppose, on what Jack Charlton means to this country. Like, Alo, I'll come to you first. As someone who would have obviously lived through, I think what were you, about 10 when we got to Italia 90? So
Jeez,
not
I
throwing
was
your age out there.
Steady
Yeah.
on. I
mid-20s,
was a very mature 12-year-old.
Yeah, but like like, geez, when we were all 10 and 12, football's the greatest thing in the world. But imagine your country getting to World Cup for the first time. Like, it must have been unbelievable.
Yeah, I think. Do you know what the funny thing is? When you asked me to come on and do the Jack Charlton one, I was actually really excited because immediately I think back to that time when you're 12, and we were brought. Sister brought us up to Donegal. Went up to Killybegs on a 2-week holiday back then. You know, that was long before the time we got on airplanes and that. But we were in Killybegs and we didn't know at the time, 12-year-olds, it was Packy Bonner land. So there was huge euphoria up there, and we stayed right up there through the whole group stages up to the quarterfinals against Italy. But the thing of it was amazing for us is that there was just football fever in the country. The amount of people out in the streets playing street football, obviously back then when there was less cars and that in the roads, but it was all spurred on by, I think, that euphoria of we're actually now on the big stage. We're playing with the Englands, the Italys of the world, the Hollands of the world, the great teams of the world at the time, and we'd earned our spot there. And I think it gave us that little bit of a feeling where, hang on a sec, now we can get out and be a footballing nation now, where we hadn't got that before. Especially young kids, we wouldn't have really followed football from the age of 7, 8, the Irish team, because it was only when they got to Euro 88, our first major tournament, that you got that real kind of buzz about the place, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually that's probably me there. It shows you that the fact I was only born in '94, you forget that Euro '88 happened first, and that was the real one, like the first big one and stuff like that. But obviously, Italia '90 was the furthest we've ever gotten in a World Cup. So that's the first thing that sticks in my mind when you think of Ireland being brilliant. And Robbie, obviously, again, you must have been 12 as well, were you, when they got to Italian 90? Oh, yes.
It was actually 4, which
Well, obviously, we would have been watching football post Charlton, and the legacy that he left behind. But obviously, I'm sure your dad and stuff like that, and your cousins or whatever would have seen that Irish team around. And obviously, being a Leeds man, then getting into it, Jack Charlton is obviously an absolute legend at Leeds. He's up there being one of the greatest players of all time. So for you, like, what does Jack Charlton symbolise, both as, say, Leeds and as Ireland?
Just for me, as you said, Tom, he's an absolute legend. Legend of the game, but legend as a person as well. And I think as we go on through the podcast, we watch the documentaries and it's stuff about in his books and stuff like that. People that have written about him. He basically put Ireland on the map in terms of football, but actually put us on the map in terms of we realised we could be great, really, and really showed the world, Ireland off to the world. And I think he had a big part to play in that. Made us believe in ourselves. Anything is possible. We're only a small nation. Do you know that way? As you said, being a Leeds fan and him having that affiliation with Ireland as well, it's just like, it's mental. Do you know that way?
Yeah.
He is a true legend in all aspects of life and in football, that way. And I think, where people probably don't realise how good of a player he was, that way.
And that's it.
He was a centre half, actually only took up football kind of late, if you like, in respect. He actually really didn't have much of an interest in football. Funny story, Leeds actually came calling. He was about 15 or 16, and he actually turned them down at the start. He says, "Geez, you must be talking about Bobby, our kid." So Bobby Charlton and him are obviously brothers. Bobby Charlton, one of the greatest footballers ever. No need to no introduction for a football fan. And you know, he knocked Leeds back and went to work with his dad. I think it was in the coal mines or something like that. He's a Geordie.
Probably.
In a place called Ashington, and he then actually had a change of heart and said, you know what, I'm going to give it a go and start playing. So he went and signed for Leeds, and then the rest, they say, is history. 20 years at the one club, over 600 appearances, 6 major titles, some European success back in them days, won first division titles with Leeds, which would have been the equivalent of the Premiership then, an FA Cup, and just a great playing career, you know what I mean? That people may not realise that he had, and that Leeds team at that time in his period where, you know, he just missed out then on another little kind of great period in Leeds' history, but that particular Leeds team and that kind of era, he was very much a part of that, and they were excellent. One kind of probably maybe a little bit of a push, but a bit like Atletico Madrid now, kind of nearly get to a couple of European finals and, you know, win a league or hit 2 and a few cups, and you know.
And they were an absolutely filthy, dirty team like Atletico Madrid as well. You're leaving that bit out, I think.
They had a little bit of everything, you know, but Charlton was a massive part of that as a player. Obviously, on a chat now about, like, you know, obviously the main thing that he did as a player, which was unbelievable.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. And actually, there's a couple of stats that I pulled up from the Leeds website about him, because, like what you're going to say, 66 when they win the World Cup, you know, not an awful lot of people are focusing on Jack Charlton. It's the Bobby Moores, it's the Bobby Charltons, it's the Jeff Hursts, you know, the people that stood out. But one thing that I found fascinating was that he made, as you say, it was over 700 games for Leeds, right? He, with Norman Hunter in defence, obviously everyone knows Norman Hunter, bite your legs and all this, and the two of them were created this formidable partnership. But yeah, because Bobby Moore was the main man for England, Hunter actually very rarely even played for England. He only had a handful of caps and very rarely played beside Charlton in the English team. And they reckon if Bobby Moore wasn't there and Hunter was there, they probably still would have went on to win the World Cup. But the two of them, Hunter was a bit more, you know, two of them are very, very physical, but Bobby Moore was a technically excellent footballer, and Charlton was the kicker. That was what Alf Ramsey wanted. You know, he wanted someone to get up, head the ball. As you say, he was 6'2", 6'3", whatever he was, and fit. You know, but Bobby Moore was the Rolls Royce. You know, and they go on, and obviously they win the World Cup in '66, and it's the greatest honour that any England player could ever have at the national team, and only obviously those guys have done it. But I just think not enough is said. And do you feel, Allo, that his career is overshadowed because of Bobby Charlton? Which I'm sure it's natural enough, but he still won World Cups. And as Robbie said there, the Fairs Cup was the old UEFA Cup. They won it twice, Leeds, along with obviously the 2 or 3 league titles or whatever it was, the FA Cups. But he is overshadowed to a degree as a player.
Yeah, I'd say to a degree. I'd say where he's going to readdress that balance was in his managerial career. With Ireland, I suppose it kind of that brought him to later stage fame, where Bobby didn't really have great success on the management side of it. In terms of playing, it's no dissimilar. You talk about the centre back pairings of one technical, one physical. It's probably the same to this day in most top clubs. They have that balance, the artist and the warrior. So I think with Jack having Bobby as a brother, yeah, it's look, he's massively in the shadow, but it's also that thing of we rarely kind of talk about defenders as heroes, don't we? They don't score many goals, they don't get many assists, and they do the cleaning up work at the back, they do the hard work, they shift the graphs, you know. So I think Bobby was a genius with a football, the things he could do with a ball at his feet, where Jack would be more remembered. Like you said, we always talk about headers, and sadly, obviously, he develops dementia later in life, in correlation with that. But what I would say is, yeah, you're going to be overshadowed, aren't you, when you have a brother with that kind of level of technical ability,
as good as that,
and you're breaking into the national team at a later stage of life. So, but he was also his bigger brother as well. So really, did a very strange dynamic from what I can see on documentaries and things like that.
Yeah,
their relationship. They were two very, very different characters, I think. I think Jack definitely embraced that working class northern culture, where Bobby kind of was more happy with. Yeah, he was more happy with the status. I think Jack would be happy left alone fishing, and whereas Bobby really lapped up the kind of hero worship
limelight. And I think that, you know, one thing you mentioned there as well that I forgot to mention was that you say Robbie touched on it as well. It was later on in life that he really developed a love for football and got into football. And he was actually only called up to the England squad at 29. And he only made 35 appearances for England, over a 5 year span towards then the end of his career. But, you know, I don't think I've ever heard of a player have such an impact in the England team, being called up at 29. And you have to remember, a 29-year-old back in 1965 is not like a 29-year-old being called up these days. They didn't have the fitness, they didn't have the technology to allow them to prolong their careers. So for them to be that, good in those kind of to win a World Cup, essentially, I think is incredible. But I think there's a very important thing you said there as well. If you were to toss up what kind of personality would have suited Ireland and Irish people and everything between Jack Charlton and Bobby Charlton, it's Jack Charlton all day. It's that bringing the humor into it, being relaxed, being a working class person, being willing to work hard, all of that. Where Bobby Charlton is, as you say, hello, Man United, the glitz and glamour, Ballon d'Ors, European Cups. It's a totally different dynamic. And there's actually a new book out as well. The Two Brothers, it's called. I think it's is it by Jonathan Wilson or someone like that, or Wayne Barton actually brought it out. Two Brothers. It's on the dynamic between the two of them. It's actually supposed to be brilliant. So, yeah, Robbie, you're going to jump in there.
Yeah, just before we move on to the next part, and just go show how good he was of a footballer. He actually won the Football Writers Player of the Year 12 months after the World Cup, and that's the highest individual accolade you can win in England, which is amazing. If you think down the years, it's not many centre halves have done that, and he actually has over. I think he got 70 goals for Leeds as well in his career. So for the centre half to score 70 goals in a career, I know he played for 20 seasons, but that's something else. So Shawty did have kind of a little bit of everything to his game. To win the Football Writers Player of the Year in that era as well, with a World Cup winning England team, as you said, with Bobby Moore, Bobby Charlton, you would have thought it would have been a bit of a Messi Ronaldo thing on a domestic front that they probably would have dominated. So for him to get in there to that is amazing, and he is underestimated as a footballer how good he was. But I think coming in so late, it shows how much of a born leader he was.
Absolutely.
That obviously shines through later on in his life then, as he goes into management,
Exactly. And, it's very good what you say, because Dennis Law wins the Ballon d'Or in 64, Charlton wins it in 66, George Best wins it in 68. So for Jack Charlton to win Football Writers Player of the Year in that era with 3 Ballon d'Or winners playing for Man United, that just goes to show how good he was. Leeds were competing as well, and that's you don't hear that being thrown around too often, that Jack Charlton won it, that way then as well, which is fantastic. But look, obviously the main aspect of the podcast is because of Charlton's impact as a manager. But briefly, before we move on to him taking the Ireland job in '86, Ireland, prior to Charlton, like we say, you're talking about, the formation of the Irish Football Association, the Northern Irish Football Association. It's kind of all up in the air, kind of after World War II and stuff like that, and you have the Troubles aspect of it, and the dual citizenship, and then the splitting of the team. It was just a mess, But the couple of managers previous to it just couldn't get us to a tournament. But obviously Charlton's impact's amazing. So what is the state of play prior to Charlton coming in?
I think it's more of we quite a strong League of Ireland in terms of their representation on the Irish team for a number of years. So it was a strange dynamic in that UEFA kind of rules, the granny rules, so to speak, kind of played into Charlton's hand. So it was opportune in that aspect. We had got players like Liam Brady before Jack arrived, so we had got some quite like good players like Mark Lawrence and Liam Brady, and these were guys playing at the highest level. And we had only missed out on 86, I think, on goal difference. So like we had 82, yeah, sorry, Rob, 82 on goal difference. So we had come close, and we had been unlucky in certain aspects. But I just think the type of football we were trying to play against, the teams we were trying to qualify against, wasn't going to bring much success. So I think the one big thing that Charlton done when he did come in, you have to remember when he was asked to take the job, they had to ask him 3 to 4 times. And within those 3 to 4 times when Des Casey was ringing him and asking him what Charlton was doing, it wasn't that he was saying no and just go away. It was he was going off and doing his homework on the team. And he famously turned around and said to them, if you can't qualify for a World Cup with that team, well, then there's something wrong. So he was more or less saying the players are there that you have. This is before he brought in the Ray Houghtons and the like. But I think pre-Charlton is different in that I don't think that it would have ever crossed Owen's mind, look, why can't we just play a more direct style of football akin to our strengths at the time, which Charlton was able to identify. But we were very much a nearly nation. So we were that nearly nation. We had good following. Games were full. Like stadiums were full.
Yeah.
But we just hadn't got the 1 or 2, I'm going to say, star players that were able to drag it over the line, the likes of McGrath's then coming through.
Exactly,
and players like that.
We to say that we were nearly third or even fourth in terms of sport as well in the country at the time, like behind the Gaelic football and the hurling, and we have fallen in like behind them. I never thought we were first choice up until maybe these kind of last 20 or 30 years, or the pre-Charlton. I wouldn't have thought we were the most dominant sport in Ireland. Football.
Yeah, I think sometimes success comes with just qualification. So, like when you qualify for a major tournament, you generate interest, and with that interest brings finances and everything else that comes along with the development off the pitch. But it's not that I don't think we're third or fourth sport in terms of level of interest, because if you look at the amount of teams like United, Leeds, Liverpool at the time that had huge following in Ireland back in the 70s and early 80s. So the game was followed, football was followed, the national team was followed. But I think it was just the belief. We needed someone to come in almost as cocky, I'm going to say cocky, arrogant, and as brash as Charlton, to kind of nearly drive that belief forward and say, no, we can qualify, but we may have to do it differently. We may have to reinvent how we're going to try and qualify for tournaments, which is what he did. But I think prior to that, there was almost an over-reliance on players like Brady. Everything would go through the likes of a Brady or a Lawrence, and where when we played with Charlton, it was the sum of the parts was, that was our strength. It wasn't any one particular player.
Yeah, and you know what? And that is a good point. And Rob, I'd probably nearly say football still isn't the number one sport in this country, given it might be in Dublin. But you go down the country, it's very few football pitches, very few football clubs. It's still huge GAA country, and look, it is what it is. That's always the way it's going to be in this country as well. But I do think that Charlton propelled it, and we'll talk a little bit more about his legacy towards the end. But I mean, he massively propelled it in this country. I'm actually looking at the Euro 88 qualification group after Charlton had come in. And it's actually outstanding, because prior to that, we hadn't won a game in 18 months. We won one game between 84 and 86. And obviously, like, that's naturally going to happen because they sacked the manager, they bring a new manager in. So, like, we've seen the state of play of Ireland prior to that. We're a small country, like you said, guys. We're not qualifying for anything. We've had here or there world-class player, say a generation, a Liam Brady or a Giles, this sort of thing. But we don't have a team. We don't pull together a very strong team that can be consistently good on a consistent basis. And obviously Charlton comes in then, Robbie, and I'm looking at the qualification group, like I say, and
just on him prior to getting the job, Tom. Just like synonymous with Charlton's career and even Bobby Charlton's career, the stories that come out are just mad. It's like it was written in the stars and sometimes. Bobby with the Munich air disaster and surviving that and coming on, and Jack there's some mad great stories. I was reading today that before he got the job, Ireland, they must have asked or interviewed about 10 or 12 candidates, some big names as well. And I think it boiled down, I know one that stuck in my head anyway was the great Bob Paisley. Was in the running, and Charlton, I can't remember the third one. I know Liam too, he had a stint before on hand. I think maybe he was the third one. Don't quote me on that. And just anyway, Jack was shocked when they actually rang him, because he had heard that. And incidentally, I think when Don Revie had resigned before that, after the England thing, Jack actually applied for the England job, and they didn't even have the decency to get back to him. So he really held a gripe with that. He was disgusted that they hadn't even said, look, no, or, we'll give you an interview. He didn't even get a response from England. So when the Ireland came along, he wasn't even expecting it to get the job. And then, as Allo said, he made some, I wouldn't say demands, but I think as the story goes, he was sitting across the table from whoever was in charge of the FAI at the time. And he says, what are you talking about, contracts or money? He says, it's an absolute privilege. Give me whatever our hand is on, and I'll manage the team for that. It's a privilege to manage this country. And a piece of paper came across the table, and Jack opened it up, and he says, it's not that much of a privilege, and threw it back to him. So, and the regulations about fishing and stuff like that in the contract, and where he'd have time off, and etc. etc. So, that was just a funny story that before he actually took over the job, and then as we know what a job he actually did do, as you were saying, getting through the qualifying for 88 is probably forgotten about because of what went on.
Exactly.
But I think in general, lads, if you think he was 10 years thereabouts in the job,
yeah,
he went 6 years unbeaten in Lansdowne Road.
Jeez.
And I'm actually looking, Allo, you mentioned it a few minutes ago about in terms of still pulling in the crowds. I'm looking at an Ireland game here in the 1988 qualification, home to Scotland. It was 0-0, and Lansdowne Road 48,000. Back in 1986, it's huge. It's absolutely massive, and obviously people could see what was happening with the team, that he was probably bringing in, getting results. He was getting good players in, and that sort of thing. But look,
do you know what the big thing is, Tom? Just before you move on as well,
yeah, of course.
just touching on what you're saying about the crowds. We have to remember the economic situation in the country at the time as well.
Exactly,
come through a really bad recession early 80s. So the country were hoping for something to change. And sometimes when something sporting big happens like that, and it's that Celtic Tiger thing of qualifying for tournaments and the stories of people going to the credit union for loans to travel to 88, to travel to Stuttgart, and to travel to Italy, and to travel to America. It was like Robbie said, it was made to happen. It was Charlton came along at a time when the country needed to believe in something, and I think he gave us something to believe in. But he was that enigmatic, knowledgeable, and great a character that you would believe him if he told you were kind of
exactly. And I think that's what I was touching on about the personalities of the two brothers. I think it wouldn't have worked with anyone that wasn't like Charlton. That didn't have that bubbly, humorous kind of loving, personality that people wanted to get behind them. They wanted to support them, and this is from someone that didn't live in the period. I wasn't around them, but you can see it in the reactions of people. You can see it in the way people speak about him, that this guy, people wanted to follow him. People wanted to be led by him, and it opened up doors for Ireland that were never there previously. And obviously then we're getting into it with Euro 88. We won 4 games in the qualifying, and we only lost 1 game. Bulgaria, Belgium, Scotland, and Luxembourg. They qualify for Euro 88, and the country obviously just goes mad. Like we've never gotten to any tournament
before. Did you have to rely on Scotland drew in Bulgaria, did they, or something like that?
Yeah, we went through a goal. We needed Scotland to win. We needed Scotland to score, basically. Or I think.
Yeah, just looking at it here, was they drew 0-0 away to Luxembourg.
Gary McKay, was it? I think scored a goal as well, didn't he?
Gary McKay scored against Bulgaria,
to get us through.
That was true, actually. Would you believe?
Yeah, and we went through by a point ahead of Bulgaria. So that as you say, that Scotland result is what put us through. Yeah.
So we had a bit of luck as well. Yeah.
But that's a feature, though,
wasn't it? Qualification then, like you'd only won through.
Yeah.
I think you'd 8 teams in Euro 88, did you, or something like that?
There was 5 in the group, but as you say, only 1 went through, and there's only a point between us and Bulgaria. So that goal, it's a goal that basically qualified us for Euro 88. But obviously, we get there to the tournament, and Allo, give us a bit of insight into Charlton in terms of. We spoke about obviously the personality that he brings to the team and his man management, and we've all heard the stories about how he managed different players, and obviously particularly the relationship with him and McGrath and stuff like that. That was almost father and son like. But in terms of the actual style that he brought to the Irish team with really talented footballers, it wasn't always just this hoofball, route one, knock it down the way people talk about, is it?
No, and not even before technical or tactical aspects. You think about the team he put around him, okay? So you had the likes of your Charlie O'Leary, so the kit man, he became very involved. So Charlton knew to have this little diminutive small Dublin man who could get on with people and be a kind of a light personality around the dressing room. So that creates that real sense of at ease. He allowed rebel songs to be played on the bus. He allowed the lads to have a drink when they wanted to have a drink. So before the technical and tactical aspects, he created a culture where everybody felt at ease. They felt this guy is one of us. He's not an Englishman coming from the outside that we have to fear
Yeah.
and worry about. So he done that. He brought on board. It was actually an old coach of mine at my schoolboy club, Murray Price. So Murray Price became involved. Murray was working with the FWA at the time, a fantastic coach. So Charlton was very clever in already establishing the links and that kind of relationship with the players before thinking technical, tactical. Okay, so that was the big thing. So he earned the trust of the players. Then once he earned their trust, he kind of said, "Okay, we're going to do things a little bit differently here." So he got his team around him because if he hadn't got that and he went and tried to play the way he played and trying to sell that to them, I don't think it would have been as popular because he went against the grain. He went against everything that international football teams were doing at the time. You have to remember, I know they phrase it long ball football, but to me, from a coaching perspective, there's a difference between what I call a long ball and a direct ball. A long ball is a ball just hit up the pitch to anywhere, a hit and hope, as we call it. A direct ball has purpose. And with Charlton, there was very much a method behind why we were doing things. He knew we had technical players higher up the pitch, physical players high up the pitch that could win the ball in the final third and create chances. And he knew that if we played direct into little zones and pressed really quickly and really fast and won the ball and counter pressed and won it back, we'd have a chance. It's that put them under pressure thing. Now, if Jurgen Klopp goes on and turns around and says it, they call it Gegenpressing now, and it sounds sexy. But realistically, we done that 20 years before Pep. We done it before Klopp. We done it before all of the Bielsas of the world. Charlton just had a very normal way of saying put them under pressure. But realistically, if you look at some of his old session plans, you can look them up online. They're brilliant, pen and paper stuff. But he had little drawings of the right fullback making an overlap to create an overload in the final third. Now, if that's on a coaching course and we're talking about that, we're saying that coach is a genius because he's this tactical master, where Charlton just knew, why should we play 30, 40 passes to get one shot on goal when we can get there quicker? Yeah. So his thing was teams wouldn't be able to deal with our intensity. They wouldn't be able to deal with our high press. They wouldn't be able to deal with the guts, determination, the spirit that he instilled in the squad. So he was very clever in that aspect. And what you tended to see, the biggest compliment to Charlton was we started to see other international teams do that. We played in USA 94 against a Norway team who basically mimicked Charlton's exact tactics. It ended up in a 0-0 ball draw with Roy Keane getting man of the match. And both teams played long, direct pressed high up the pitch. But other countries started to realise that he's doing something here that could potentially work. So it wasn't that he came in with this massive tactical masterclass. He just wanted to play more direct with higher intensity, get the ball up the pitch quicker. People tend not to like looking at that an awful lot, but it got results for us.
Exactly, and I think, Robbie, I'll bring you on this as well. It's a breath of fresh air hearing it from a totally different perspective. When I can draw comparisons now to Stephen Kenny, who was trying to play a brand of football that is the sexy version, that is the go-to thing that all coaches try to do now, and it isn't working. And he's the one that's getting the flack. He didn't have a caliber player, anything like Jack Charlton did, and I'm not going to try and compare the two of them. But just when Allo was talking there, I could say to himself, "Geez, it worked for Charlton. It's not working for Stephen Kenny." And I think Stephen Kenny won't be the Irish manager at the end of this week. But Robbie, going back to like what Allo said, Charlton, the football that he played, but it was also, you know, it was due to the fact that he also had a fantastic caliber of player in that Irish team at the time, didn't he?
He did, and just I'm delighted Al brought up the psychological part of it though, because I think he was way before his time. Again, we'll go back to, we said he was kind of overshadowed as a player. I don't think he got the credit he deserved as a manager. He understood people. Everyone bangs on about Sir Alex Ferguson and the sports psychology and all this. no matter how much the game evolves and you physically get stronger or there's nutrition and all this, the mental aspect of sport at a very high level is so much more greater and much more of a strain on your mental self. And to have that, Charlton had that in abundance. I think so much greater than the mental side of it than the physical side ever will be, in my opinion. And Charlton was absolutely brilliant at it. As you said, Al, he was able to judge guys. Sometimes they'd have a drink before the game, even a pint or two, truth be known. And again, another great story, which I read, and he had this from when he was a young fella, was that he, there was paper boys going around Newcastle or wherever he lived in Ashington, and they were disgusted. They used to say to him that, it's taking too long, we can't do it. Jack actually sat them down one day and went through. So he was already doing out strategies and all from a young age, went through their routes with them and actually made their time shorter and actually took a percentage of their wages off them because he had made their life a lot easier. But you can see how, even from that he was always thinking and always trying to get that extra little bit. And even with the granny rule, to play on advantage of that, and then to bring in some of them players, as you were trying to allude to, Tom, we'd had great players, you know what I mean? And then Roy Keane and all coming in as well later on. But the Charlton era, which was 88, 90, kind of inspired the likes of Keane, obviously, because he was a bit younger. 94 would have been his kind of first. But when you think back to the players that we had, Ronnie Whelan, Paul McGrath, Packy Bonner in goal, where would you get a goalkeeper like that? Amazing. Kevin Moran was a smashing player. One kind of lad who was brilliant kind of lost out under Jack, and this is where the media kind of spun. I think Dunphy was trying to say, you don't want to play football because you're not putting David O'Leary in the team, and things like that. Who was a fantastic footballer at Arsenal at the time, David O'Leary, playing for a great Arsenal team. And but he was just, the players we did have at our disposal, when you ring them off, even like Kevin Sheedy actually scored our first goal at a World Cup. They're great players. Cascarino, Quinn, John Aldridge was playing, and they were playing kind of in the top tier, which is totally different to what we have now. We're starting to see a couple of lads getting, obviously Ferguson is the most notable in the Premier League, but we did have a good level of player. But what was brilliant was they were able to listen to Jack, respect playing for their country, and we got the maximum out of what we could have. I don't see that if we had played any other way that we would have done any better, even under a different manager. I thought he was a great manager, great man manager, and as I said, the players we had were brilliant. They obviously played with 11 weekly great players, and they were able to do things like that. Great Liverpool team used to torture teams at home, couldn't get the ball back off them in the 70s and 80s. Do you know what I mean? So, it was, they were different. It was kind of different situations. And international football is about winning for me, and that's what we did. Getting through your group and qualifying for these tournaments.
I think, Robbie, you make a great point there in terms of his character. So people get caught up on managers or coaches versus manager or whatever, and they say, look, you're everything rolled into one nowadays. But for me, with Charlton and all the greats, the Fergusons and the Paisleys and the Shankleys and the Jocksteins and all these managers, it's interesting to me their backgrounds. And I'm not saying you cannot come from a middle class or upper middle class background and be a success as a coach or a manager. But what Charlton has was an appreciation for graft, for hard work, for community. He was a trade union man. He walked in the miners' strikes. He had a great understanding for what it was to get a collective group of people together to achieve something and a common goal. And with Ireland, he recognised that fairly quickly. He's dealing with players with addiction problems in McGrath. He's dealing with players who are getting stick in the media because of the granny rule, and he's having to bat all that away. The biggest thing about McGrath, and I'll touch on the sports psych, Robbie, is that I'm lucky enough that a really good friend of mine, James Claps, is sports psych, so I get great conversations with him. And like yourselves, I'll ask questions about sports psych. So and over the years, the past 10 years, what he said to me is a manager that cares for players will always do well if he can build that trust. And if you listen to any of the interviews of the ex-Ireland players over the years, Quinn, McGrath, even Keane, who's not Roy Keane, wouldn't be quick to give an amazing compliment. The one thing they always say about Jack is how much they admire, respected and cared about him. They never bring up tactics or technical football, but they just talk about how he made them feel. And I think that overrides everything. I think the culture he created at Ireland was almost cult-like in the way that you knew they'd run through a wall for you, they'd do anything for you, and they'd carry out his plans. Not one of them in his 10-year tenure came out and criticised the style of play or how he was coaching the team,
No.
It's
which is
fascinating,
unusual.
but it's fascinating, and these are also players, as Robbie touched on a minute ago, that are playing elite football. They're winning league titles in England. It's not like they're in one of these situations. Oh, I'm just happy to be getting picked for Ireland. It was an extremely competitive team. It was a competitive squad.
Mm.
They were elite players. They're the ones with the egos. They're ones that are the toughest to manage. And as you say, hello, there wasn't a blip, and you never even hear anything lingering years and years later. But one thing I want to move on to, so we're not getting caught up too much on time, is that I'm looking through. Obviously, our very first match at a major tournament, it had to be England. That they get in the group, and they just couldn't have the stars like these kind of things are written before they happen. And Jack Charlton obviously being English and winning the World Cup with England, and then you see we get England in the group. And what happens? Obviously probably one of the most famous results ever for Ireland, bar
Yeah.
qualifying later on. But we beat England 1-0 and Ray Houghton scores, and then you move it on, and Ronnie Whelan scores, I think, the greatest goal that anyone's ever scored in an Irish
Everybody,
jersey. Bicycle kick against Russia,
As
which
he shinned that, Tom, didn't he? Shinned it. He,
yeah, I'd love to shin one like that. I tell you, Jesus Christ.
Cinderella. Yeah, it was a great hit though.
From a long throw,
Mm.
straight from a
we're
long
actually very
throw.
unlucky in that tournament. Like, we were knocked out, I think, only by a goal or something like that. We were brilliant in the game as well, I think.
Yeah, but if you
Probably one
look
of
at
our
the
better games, Ronnie Whalen said. Do you know that
yeah,
way?
but if you look at the group that we got, like the Soviet Union topped the group, they were excellent at the time. The Netherlands, obviously, excellent. England and us, it's very, very difficult. England obviously get beaten in their three games
And
in
you've
the
got to
tournament.
remember, Tom, that Dutch team this is around the era, and the Ajax, the really strong Ajax team, and the really strong Italian teams,
With
Sacchi
the Dutch
teams
players, yeah.
with Hull Van
Van Basten
Basten,
and all, wasn't it? That was the
Yeah.
goal.
yeah,
The goal against
Koeman, and they went on to win it. So like it's like you said, the Russian team, fantastic team as well,
Well,
really
but like
strong team.
the Netherlands beat Russia in the final.
Yeah.
So like the
Yeah,
two finalists were in our group, and we only finished a point behind them. So as you say, Allo, it couldn't have been tougher. And then England, we all know that English team. It was a little bit of transitional period, coming to the early 90s into then Euro 96 when it kind of took off again. But it still is no disgrace, that performance by Ireland. It's outstanding. And the feeling in the country then, Allo, like, is do people feel like it was a one and done, or was there this sense that no, they're building something here that it could go on even further? Like the Liam Brady's at this stage, like you say, they're kind of finishing, aren't they? They're not
mm.
really getting in. It's the end of those sort of players. But this is the period now when, like, Paul McGrath, I think, had he left Manchester United at this stage? I think he probably had in '88, had he?
Um,
Or he was about to.
No, McGrath was United in '88. He went to Villa then. So '94 he was Villa.
Yeah,
He was.
so I mean, you still had these world class players that were still in the team. I'm just looking through the list of them there. It's
Mm.
unbelievable. But as I say, they're building towards the qualification for Italia 90. Is there a confidence in the team, or is it we just about qualified?
No, there was certainly a confidence because if you think about like you had O'Leary come back in '90, obviously after his falling out over the Icelandic tournament, you had the likes of Steve Staunton coming into the squad, Chris Hughton, players like that were going to add to what we already had and give us an extra bit of a dimension. Andy Townsend, etc. So like there was definitely a belief because we'd gone and beaten England, albeit if you remember that '88 game, it was backs to the wall for the remainder of the
Yeah.
game. We scored a goal. Bonner had probably one of the best games he's ever had in an Ireland short. But to me, that's one of the best English teams of all time. You're coming to the Robson era. That '90 England team to me could have won that World Cup.
And
Like
and why I say they were kind of coming to an end, it was probably looking back as the results more so
yeah,
than the players they had. The way even
yeah.
Gary Lineker was fucking unbelievable
But
in
we
that.
Yeah,
completely, it just transfixed the whole country. I was reading today that after 88, 250,000 people now in the streets.
Yeah.
And like, what had we done? Effectively, we had not even got out of the group, but you
Do you
know,
know what
and a different kind of format then. So we were so unlucky. We were close, but we weren't close. But
do
like,
you know what's really interesting, Robbie? Just on a tactical, if we talk about point of view, and that England team. So we beaten them in '88. So obviously our first game in our group in '90 is against England. So they've got real motivation and reason to beat us now. But they've also carried massive pressure with them now because they'd lost to us in a major tournament. Okay, so we gone into that with a bit of hope. The goal England score comes from a Chris Waddle, I'm nearly sure, cross from almost at the halfway line, a long ball, if you want to call it, or direct ball, for which we were criticised, in over between the two centre-backs. Lineker falls onto the ball and almost falls into the net. It's a real freakish type of goal, but it's almost like a goal that we would score. Okay, so so it was almost like England had looked at us in '88 and learned a thing or two and said, hang on a sec, let's try play them a little bit at their own game. So we'll mix it up a bit between possession and direct football. So we then go the whole game almost coming to the 80-odd minute. And that direct football that we're criticised for, Bonner sends one straight up the pitch to the edge of the 18-yard. Ball falls to Sheedy. Sheedy cuts in and scores a great goal. So the two goals and the contrasting styles in that game, England had picked up a thing or two from us from '88. And I don't think it's recognised enough, really, in terms of how we changed how they play or had to play in that tournament, you know?
I can imagine that result wasn't popular in England, besides the fact that Ireland beat England and England get beaten. But the fact that an Englishman managing Ireland beats England in European Championships, they lose their 3 games, they get knocked out. So it can, not that they're obviously jealous of Ireland or anything like that, but they're obviously saying we need to change it up a little bit or whatever, you
we
know.
have an Englishman on this podcast, and that's controversial enough in this day and time. Imagine what it was like back then, managing a
I think, look, you have to remember as well, it's like a cup match when we play England, so it's a derby, isn't it?
It's a derby.
And out the window.
I think it was in the qualifiers for '96 or '96, I think, when we played them in Wembley, we drew 1-1 as well. Quinn scores a lovely goal. So like every time we played them, we'd never really got beaten comprehensively. Only pre the Charlton era, maybe. I think we got a bit of a hiding. I think it was a 4-0 Daily Mount or something. But apart from that, you've also got the euphoria of playing England, the euphoria of playing your biggest rival, so to speak. So if you think of it in those terms as well, that's enough to motivate the players beyond anything else.
Absolutely, and we'll move it on then. Obviously, '88 is massive. Into '90, like we say, we get England again, a draw against England. You know, we've peaked. You know, we've peaked at this point, Robbie. You know, in '90, and it's obviously the greatest achievement by any Irish team to date that they obviously get through to the quarterfinals, and the famous penalty and stuff like that against Romania, Dave O'Leary, and the famous commentary and all of that. We all have seen it a million times, and um, it's heartbreak then, you know, against Italy and stuff. But at this moment in time, Ireland are pretty much an elite team within Europe, aren't they? Like, you know, in terms of qualifying for tournaments, beating big teams. I think were we ranked something like 6th in the world or 5th in the world or something like that
Yeah,
at one stage.
pre '94, we were ranked 6th in the world. Our two warm up games for USA '94, we'd gone away and beaten Germany 2-0 in Germany, and we got some really crazy results even in so-called friendly games. But yeah, we were 6th at one stage. We were 6th in the world in the FIFA rankings. Yeah,
Which is incredible. And I mean, coming more into then say our area, I'm not skipping over '90 too much, but we all know what happened. It's probably the most talked about thing in the whole of Irish football is Italian '90. But moving it on slightly into '94, which is more our area, it's a different kind of player starts to develop a little bit then, isn't it, Robbie? Like you touched on it a few minutes ago, you had your kind of your Roy Keanes are coming in at that stage, and probably McAteer as well. Is he kind of coming in at that era as well? I'm not too sure. Maybe he's
you've
a little
got
bit
Phil
early.
Babb, you've got Gary Kelly. It's a new era. Kind of Paul McGrath still there. He's actually brilliant against the Dutch. Who eventually knocked us out in '94. But again, I think '94 was a great World Cup, but you know the weather didn't help us in '94. I think it was some of the games shouldn't have went ahead at the times that they did. It really did affect us. Obviously, another great night and a great goal by Houghton is the Giant Stadium and against Italy. And Italy actually are favourites. Roberto Baggio was the best player in the world at the time. Italy go on to the final and we beat them. And it just goes to show, like, we're in New York. Conditions are a little bit nicer, still warm, obviously, and we were beating Italy. Do you know what I mean? Who are favourites for the tournament, along with Brazil, I think. Don't even know if Brazil were favourites, actually. They just kind of turned up and were brilliant, Brazil. Germany or Argentina are the holders. I think it's Germany. But they struggled. But a whole host of nations are emerging as well, the likes of Nigeria and all in '94. But we were brilliant against Italy. It's a great goal. And then you're thinking, yes, we're going to kick on. And the weather gets us against Mexico. Bit of controversy with the officials as well, with Aldridge. And then, as Allo says, two teams cancel each other out in Norway. And the momentum Mexico killed the momentum there. And maybe it was just, and then we have to play the Dutch, which is never easy. And they were kind of rising as well, but they've always had strong teams, really. It's only the couple of maybe latter years that Holland have rebuilt and they're struggling a bit. But yeah, 94, like 90 was the catalyst that, it really made everything, the whole country stand up and change our perspective on football, life as well. I think I'll probably be better placed to talk about that. But, from the documentary
even the country was coming into an economic, upturn as well, wasn't it? Like everything in Ireland was starting to, not everything was coming good, but across Europe, even in the UK, with the Premier League coming in. I know it sounds silly, but it felt like everything in that period was taking a massive upturn. Labour and stuff, the Tony Blair coming in, the music, everything seemed to have this massive explosion in the 90s of goodness. And in Ireland, then obviously with the Celtic Tiger boom, and everyone had a few quid and everything. And then on top of that, the Irish national team are sixth in the world. They're qualifying for World Cups. They're playing brilliant football. And I'm just looking at the 1994 squad there, and some of the names, like, one thing I do notice is the ages of them, though, and that's why I think it came to an end. Packy Bonner's 34, Kevin Moran's 38, McGrath's 34, Houghton's 32, Aldridge is 35. They were getting on.
McCarthy had retired in '93. He was the captain of that 88-90. We didn't obviously qualify for '92, and it was a team very much in transition.
And that's why obviously didn't carry on prior to that into '96 or whatever, because they didn't have the people behind them at that moment. But Allo,
I think we were there.
That is the highest point, is it? That 1994, like.
Do you know? I think 90, because I think, like, you just captured the age thing there as well. McGrath had been getting injections and not training at that stage. Funnily enough, 94 versus Italy is his best game in Northern Short. It's the famous one where Franco Baresi runs the length of the pitch and bats off 3 or 4 players to get his jersey. Baresi, arguably at the time, the best centre back in the world. So it was that iconic moment where McGrath three interceptions against Roberto Baggio, and you see him getting up, and that's iconic, But we'd Niall Quinn missing then through he had an injury, so he didn't play. We Tommy Coyne playing up front, who actually was taken to hospital the night of the match due to heat exhaustion. He'd worked that hard in the Giant Stadium. So for me, the holes were starting to appear in the team. 94. So obviously the Mexico game's a tough one. Robbie's right. Midday, in that humidity and that heat, we had to get special dispensation from FIFA to throw bags of water onto the pitch. So we had to bring in a rule change to allow us to do that. If you remember the iconic picture of Steve Staunton in the lineup, crippled in the heat, So we were 2-0 down. I think it was Luis Garcia scored 2. Aldridge gets the goal, actually, that gets us through to the second round. So that goal, Aldridge's goal, is what puts us through there on goal difference. And then the Norwegian one was a drab affair. But what we did start to see was, as much as we had Bab coming through and Gary Kelly, phenomenal players, and Terry Phelan played that World Cup as well, the signs were there with the likes of Bonner and some of the older players, and that was the back of 94 very much became our transitional stage into the Mick McCarthy era. So you could see the kind of, we'd come through 2 tournaments, spanning the guts of nearly 10 years if you include the qualification campaigns. So I think we were starting to see a real change in how teams adapted to the style of play against us. So the Dutch, if you look at how they played in that game, they pressed our fullbacks really quickly, so we weren't able to play the direct football as much as we wanted to. I think their first goal came from Terry Phelan under pressure, heading the ball back, balls whipped into Bergkamp, he scores, and the second one's a Wim Jonk strike from distance and Bonner flaps at it.
Had a nightmare, didn't he?
Yeah, and it goes in. So it was a brilliant tournament. I remember the feeling in the country, like you said, the 90s, mid-90s. You had Britpop, you had all that going on, and you had, it was a great time to be a teenager.
And Aston Villa were a good team as well. Hello, then.
Aston Villa were phenomenal in I think we beat Leeds in the League Cup around that era. Brian Little's team.
3-0.
3-0. I didn't want to bring it up. I said I wouldn't bring it up.
I can't say that. You done us as well, and
yeah, we did. We did. No, yeah. Look, we had Villa had a great team then. A lot of Irish players playing. If you think of Staunton, Houghton, McGrath. Townsend, obviously, but
that had to play an Irish team, yeah.
we did, we really did.
Yeah.
But I think, look, it was that transitional moment. I think where for Charlton, I don't think Charlton could adapt to play any other way. He only knew one. Yeah. He only wanted to play one way. Was very good at that way, and I think the world of football in general was evolving,
changing. Yeah,
analysis was coming in. Teams were getting better. Yeah, Sky TV.
Sports came in.
Team that brought in the era of analysis. Teams were getting better at kind of analysing opponents, setting up tactically different. So we didn't really evolve in that era. And what was happening was the likes of the Dutch teams and that were able to kind of adapt to that and play around.
When you look at '95, the Ajax team, that young Dutch, mainly Dutch players.
We got beaten in the playoff at Anfield.
We also touched on it. Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Sorry, that playoff in Anfield, Robbie. We were compressed. That was Charlton's last game.
Yeah, we were well beat.
It was Kluivert in his prime, but that game could have been 6 or 7. It could have been embarrassing. There was almost an era of inevitability for the Irish team then. It was. Yeah. You didn't want to sack Charlton. You couldn't sack Charlton because of what he'd achieved. So he realizes this himself. He knew it was either he go or someone replaces him and he resigns. But I think there was a feeling of him
just go before we don't want to push it type of thing. Like
he kind of knew what he'd done with the country. He knew how far he took us, and I wouldn't have liked him to have seen him stay on for another qualifying campaign then.
No,
because I don't think we would have done anything in it.
No, and there's two things about that as well. I think we did a podcast there a good while ago on Arsene Wenger, who came into England in 97, 98, and you look at the difference with what he ended up doing in the next 2 years at Arsenal, and then you look, Ireland was still being managed with Jack Charlton. So it's right, you're right, Allo. Football was massively starting to move in a totally different direction that we actually probably did miss the bus on. Maybe that 96 campaign, if you had got someone else in, something different may have happened. But unfortunately, with international football, you can't sign players. We had to wait for another 4 years until we had the next gen coming in. And, in terms of then, we'll wrap her up here now in a minute. But obviously, Charlton does go then in 96. 10 years is a huge span for an international manager. Typically, they're judged off tournaments, isn't it? They get either a 2-year contract or a 4-year contract. And then, depending on that, they're kept on. 10 years is huge. And it just goes to show he was an absolutely phenomenal character and manager for us. And over the last, say, 5 minutes now, the legacy that he's left, Robbie, let's start with you in terms of, you would have grown up and started playing football in the post-Jack Charlton era in Ireland. My heroes would have been the Robbie Keanes, the Damien Duffs, who would have been kids watching that Jack Charlton era and watching us play for tournaments. He left behind a massive legacy for Irish football.
Unbelievable. I think one of the biggest compliments you can give him is Robbie Keane, Damien Duff, Roy Keane. Do you know what I mean? These were world-class players. He inspired all them. I've no qualms about that. No bones that he was even in the documentaries, and you look back and you see all the post-its on the wall, the level of detail that goes into all that. He was, he created that, what we had them 10 years. We had some great players, but the person they looked up to was Jack. Do you know what I mean? There was no Jack was the one that had made the difference. We were, for years, we had some great players, but we just couldn't get it going. Do you know that way? And then this fella comes along with larger than life character, great passion for the game and for people. And he really resonated with, again, as we said, he lifted the whole country. So, and let us show what we could do on a world stage, whether that be getting drunk and happy, supporting our team, win, lose, or draw, you know what I mean, and being brilliant. People couldn't even understand us. We were in France in 2016 and singing to the babies on the train, and just bringing a different carnival atmosphere to what should be a great community and World Cups and things like that. And Jack delivered all that. And I think, as I said, the biggest compliment from a football point of view I can pay to them 3 players were inspired by him. Whether they agree with that or not, I don't know personally. But there's no way that football would have been gripped like it is in this country without Jack Charlton. That way.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Hello, obviously, then someone that lived through it, someone that you probably were coaching then, where towards kind of the 2000s, early 2000s, you would have really started getting into coaching, and which was a post Charlton era. Not that Charlton, well, you can tell me, did he have an influence in terms of schoolboy football, and did he maybe breed a new generation of coaches, that wanted to play football, that wanted to get involved,
Yeah, generally, like if you think about it, like I talked about Morris Price, from a coaching perspective, I'm looking at someone who coached me at the club I'm at, and I'm going, Jesus, if he can come from a club like Lourdes Celtic and have a career in coaching and go on to do really well, then why can't an ordinary person like myself or other coaches that I coach with? So from a coaching perspective, you're looking at more that where he's given coaches an opportunity. The legacy is more what Robbie says in terms of it's giving people something to hope for in terms of we have the respect of the international community. You look at the amount of school boy and girl football clubs all across the country now. There's a hell of a lot more now than there was pre-Charlton. So there's more people playing. If you think about people that even go abroad, and I know you had a link with St. Kilda's there a while back with the podcast, and I'm watching their social media, and they're over in Australia setting up a massive community of teams and doing really well and winning things. So congrats to them on it. But what Charlton has done is he's inspired people, Irish people from Ireland, all over the world, setting up teams. I see teams set up in New York now, teams here. There's a club we have a connection with in France now as well. And like Ireland was never considered a footballing nation. So I think what Charlton has done is he's put us on that map firmly now. We're firmly on that map. And it's given us hope and belief. The reason why we continue to watch the Irish football team is that we know we've done it before.
Yeah.
So we have a template and example for what success looks and feels like. And as much as things aren't great now, I do fully believe it'll come full circle. And I think it may be another 10 years before we qualify for a major tournament. But I definitely think we will see those days again. But I don't think we'll ever relive them in the way we did under Jack Charlton, because there's no 2 Jack Charltons. There was only ever one.
That's it, the perfect note to end this episode on, and I agree 100%. Although there's only one Jack Charlton, and I think for me, I haven't watched Mick McCarthy get us to a tournament, haven't watched Martin O'Neill getting us to a tournament. You don't see those highlights on television when it comes to Ireland going to tournaments. It's Jack Charlton's Ireland, and I hope that we do get those days again, and let's hope for the win now against France. Probably not going to happen. Definitely not with Evan Ferguson injured now as well. But here's the hoping, lads. And thanks very much for coming on tonight, boys.
See you later,
Thanks, lads. Great chat.
Talk to you again.